So we'll move straight on to the panel. Thank you all for giving up your time today. Just to, I should have said this earlier, but we are recording this sort of session, so hence the microphones. So if you've got anything, I'd like to hear that again. We will have that up on the GAVO website probably within the next week. Okay. Our panelists: John Griffiths, MS for Newport East; Peredur, Owen Griffiths, MS for South Wales East. I always get somebody confused. I want to say South East Wales. Stephen Tiley, GAVO CEO, and Councillor Dimitri, Batrouni, leader of Newport City Council. Round of applause, please. This is my audition for question time, okay? So need to make it look good. So we've got 5 questions we're going to try and sort of work through. Basically, I'll ask the question and then each panelist take it in turn just to come back with that. That's okay. So the first question we had was, how can third sector organisations in Newport collaboratively address the root causes of community challenges such as housing, instability, poverty and access to green spaces, whilst ensuring a diverse range of voices of those directly affected are at the heart of decision making? John, can I start with you?
All right.
Straight
in, not messing around. Well, first of all, thanks very much for organising this today, and thanks very much for everybody for coming along. I know you had so much demand for places, you actually had to restrict numbers, didn't you? Which I think is very impressive. It shows a level of interest and enthusiasm and engagement. I think obviously events like this today are very important, actually, aren't they, in bringing together people, volunteers, third sector organisations, because networking is always a very important part, I think, of any event where people just have conversations, exchange contact details, keep in touch subsequently and learn a lot from each other. So that in itself is an important benefit of an event like this, I think. GAVO obviously has a key role, doesn't it, as an umbrella organisation for the voluntary sector in Gwent, and is very active in Newport, and I know he's doing lots of good things. So, it's really important to have GAVO as a resource, to provide information, to link organisations together, to help organisations bid for funding and generally develop, and to answer questions that volunteers or organisations might have. And I think sort of more broadly, it's about building partnerships. It's really good that Dimitri's on the panel today, leader of Newport City Council, because obviously the local authority is absolutely key, isn't it, with its plans and its strategies and its joint working with the third sector and a range of other organisations, setting a lead and taking a lead, and making sure that the linkages are in place as much as possible. They've had structures that the third sector is part of, aren't there? Like the public service boards and perhaps regional partnership boards. Sometimes it's Newport, sometimes it's a bit wider geographically. So it's really important to make sure the third sector has a powerful voice in those, coming together of statutory organisations with the third sector. I think the bottom line is that there are no easy answers, are there? We tell ourselves in Wales that as a small country, we've got advantages when it comes to building partnerships and networks Wales-wide, and lots of that then should be passported down to regions and cities, towns within Wales. But there are never easy answers. You just have to keep working at it, keep building the networks, keep building the partnerships. So I think there are various players that can help with that. But it's most powerful when it's bottom up. So it's what really enables communities to do things for themselves, I think, that's the most positive and most important part of the whole picture. And again, that's something that all the organisations just have to keep working on.
Thank you.
I agree with a lot of what John says. But for me, the bit that you didn't mention there, John, is to do with funding as well, and that underpinning of some of the good work. I think building relationships. Yes, we can build relationships and build partnerships, and I think that's vitally important. And listening to our communities and bringing those different voices. And chances are in this room, if you've got a problem, somebody else in this room has come across that problem, possibly fixed it, or knows a way of challenging it. So building those relationships in the communities together Wales is a community of communities. So it's bringing that element and together, and how, you know, bad news travels very quickly. Good practice, we're not very good at spreading good practice and helping each other understand. And I think that's where some of that extra funding, and it's a challenge for the council, I know, to try and balance the books and to try and support this, and you know, doing an admirable job in trying to do that, but without underpinning it with funding and maybe a poverty alleviation strategy, because poverty in Wales is probably one of the key issues that we are all dealing with, and it's how we deal with that. So I think there are elements of building those relationships, being in rooms like this together, getting to know each other, because the thing is, we're 3 million people in Wales. We probably know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to be able to get that. So it's just finding out how we do that. But then the funding element is a big issue, but also that the tendering process and all that, you know, if you're getting 1 year funding or 2 year funding, you're on that hamster wheel constantly trying to think, oh, well, I've got to either write the submission or write the evaluation. And then my people are, when good staff are thinking, where's my next job coming from? And all of that thing. So I'd like to see us working cross-party to try and work out how we, if there's a project that's working, how do we make it so that if you've got key performance indicators, and if you're ticking the boxes, then there's a way of rolling that forward rather than having to reinvent the wheel constantly, because it takes so much energy. So those are some of the key things of building on what John was saying there, of building those relationships, building those partnerships, but also the structure underneath it to make, you know, to allow our volunteering groups to be able to support our communities in coming together. So that's a bit of what I was thinking in terms of going a little bit further than you there, John, in bringing that together.
Well, firstly to say, many people, many services at Newport Council administered wouldn't happen and would fall apart without third sector now. So thank you. We're doing a great job. I know it's really tough out there. I've met many of you. Some I haven't. I'm trying to get myself round as many people as possible. And I know you're doing tremendous jobs in that yearly grant system, which I know is everyone's frustration. Councils get the same. We get a yearly. We only know yearly what we're going to get ourselves. So it feels a bit last minute from us, just because we only know last minute. The Welsh Government only knows by Christmas, is it, what it's going to get. Yeah. So there's an endemic system problem there that just goes down, doesn't it? Yeah. And it affects all of us. So how can you build those, let's all be honest, to make real impact? It's not yearly, it's 5, 10, 15 years where you make that real progress. So I think many of you do work collaboratively. Some of you don't know. And I've had so many conversations where people have asked the council for support for various different things. I've had the same conversation with 5 other organisations who want exactly the same thing. So now I would cheekily go, well, have you spoken to them? No. And you're like, well, you know, the council could definitely step up if you all want the same thing and we can help you deliver that same thing. But what I have found is there is some resistance, if I'm being completely honest with you, where some groups really just say, no, it's us. This is what we do, and we're distinct. Look, we love the others, that's fine, but they do their thing and we do our thing. So there is, if I'm being completely honest, something about the community itself also saying we need to bring down our own barriers with each other. Because the council, I was saying to you earlier, wasn't I? You know, if we're going to try and there's a big demand for community facility, right? Everyone wants a building, is the way I say it, or an office space. And so we can work collaborative together, but we can't have 10. We just can't afford 10. It's just not viable. We have to resurface our roads, switch on the street lights, do all the things other people rely on as well. So I'm always up for the conversation, collaborative with us, with the Welsh Government. I know they're always up for a conversation, as well as other members willing to support. But it also there has to be a collaborative effort on your side of the house, if I can put it that way, to say, come on guys, we all want a building, we all want a space, right? We might do slightly different things, but we all need a space. Why don't we all work together to get that space? And then I think you'll find the conversation changes quite quickly, rather than 8 or 9 or 10 different organisations asking me or the Welsh Government saying, can we have a building? And you're like, I can't give you 10. If I'm honest, I think we're best being honest. That's my style. So, we already give hundreds of thousands, to be honest, to many third sector, because you do a great job. But can we be more effective on our collaborative effort to maximise your impact and the money? I think we could do a lot better, yes.
Dimitri, I guess, or maybe GAVO really, is some of that about competition being endemic in, the funding system really then? Whereas, if you had sort of funding available for collaborative bids where organisations came together and made a bid, it would produce a very different mindset. And
it comes to that structure of how bids are done, and you're quite right. I chair the finance committee, so I know that the Welsh Government lay their budget on just before Christmas, and I'm looking at it over my Christmas dinner to try and then we've only got a little bit of time to do it. So the frustration around timing, but also that point you're making is of streamlining some of this and encouraging the outcomes that we want. We want you to be able to work together. So let's design systems that doesn't put barriers, like you're saying, in place, that we build bridges rather than barriers.
And I think it's just those systems, isn't it? That's the key part of it, because we talked a little bit about funding and how late the funding comes out, and that is a real challenge. And I think that it doesn't give us time as a sector, I suppose, to get together, to work together, to come up with those solutions all the time. When we're having funding in January, you've got to be spent at the end of March. We've already heard that coming up, that makes it a real challenge. I think there is something in maybe organisations having those off-the-shelf projects. It's really difficult to collaborate. And as we were talking about a little bit earlier on as well, what I appreciate, because I obviously work within the third sector organisation, we've got the board of trustees that sit above the organisation. We're all individual organisations ourselves, and it's difficult sometimes to be able to change that tide, to be able to have that more collaborative work, because there's those trustees maybe sometimes that are not really keen to it. So it is about us trying to work together. It is about us trying to collaborate more, and it is about us trying to have that more of an understanding of where that funding is going to be best suited for collaborative bids and collaborative working together. But I think it's just trying to overcome that issue with the fund. I think would probably help a lot of the sector in that way, to be able to do that, because it is all very, it can be quite rushed in that sense on occasion. So, but I definitely agree, though. I think that there is a need that we all need to collaborate and work a bit better together. It doesn't make a lot of sense when there's 4, 5, or 6 maybe organisations all wanting the same thing. So how do we work closer to make sure that we can actually all work together and get that underarching aim and achieve what we need? And I suppose that's where organisations like ourselves can come in and help them and support that with the support of the partners on the table. Do you want me to pick up on?
I'm just conscious of sort of time, so I'm going to jump around the questions, if that's all right. So we had a question here as a bit of a statement as well, which I'm guessing that quite person dependent, considering what's going to be happening in Westminster in a few hours' time. Many charities and third sector organisations are critical to UK government's proposals for welfare reforms. There are justified concerns that the cuts will drive more costs to the third sector, local councils and NHS, all of which are struggling with funding and resources. What are the panel's plans to deal with this and its future impact on the third sector? I want to take that first one.
Okay. I think the first thing to say, I'm sure all of us are, really concerned about what will emerge from the UK government looking at disability benefits and benefits generally. The devil's always in the detail, isn't it? I mean, I think we'd all sign up to help people to get them into work, because very often people and their families, communities are much better off in work than out of work. We all understand that. But some people, are not able to work, and they have to have benefits that allow them to lead a reasonable lifestyle. And I know there's a massive level of concern about that. And as I say, the devil's in the detail, and we'll have to see what eventually emerges. But, if we're honest, it's a worrying situation, isn't it? Because the economy is stuttering at the UK level. So we're not getting the economic growth that would allow for more money to be put into public services and used for other purposes. If defence spending is, going to be significantly increased, which seems to be the case because of the world situation, which is very, very worrying, then obviously that money is not going to be available for other public services. So as things stand at the moment, it is very, very worrying indeed. And I think in that sort of picture, when we look at the third sector, yes, it's worrying in terms of, the level of public spending that we're likely to see. But, it's many organisations in the third sector that have to be part of helping people move closer to the labour market and get into work. If that's going to be a big part of UK government's thrust to deal with these issues, it is the third sector that do that work, isn't it? A lot of people need quite a lot of help before they're ready to go into paid employment. And it's those organisations in the community that provide people with the opportunities to grow and develop and get into that position where they can take jobs. And DWP, the job centres, and many others work with those third sector organisations on that basis. So, it's like many things, I think. It's sort of double-edged in a way, isn't it? It's very worrying for the third sector, and I think we understand that. But it may also provide a number of opportunities for certain third sector organisations, and community development generally is going to be more important than ever, I think.
Yeah, it's worrying what we're going to hear today. I'm concerned about what more cuts are coming down the line and more austerity. Not we've seen the back of austerity, but we've seen more austerity, and with the winter fuel allowance being cut, with 2-child cap, with the WASPy women and the 1950s born women not being paid well, or getting what they deserve. All these things are hitting our communities at different levels. Older people, younger people, families, and it's, for me, it then becomes systematic problems in our communities that you're then working as in the voluntary organisations trying to support those families who are being made potentially poorer by decisions being made elsewhere. In Scotland, obviously, the welfare system is partially devolved, so they're able to make their own decisions, and the money that goes alongside that is devolved as well. One of the things that I'd like to see is that welfare system being devolved to Wales, so that we could actually make our own decisions and decide how we do that. One of the things that Plaid launched at our conference on the weekend was a child payment that we said if we were lucky enough to be elected as a government in next year, would be a child payment similar to what Scotland have done, and that would just alleviate some of those pressures on families. That would help, and that it was fully costed from that. But it's those endemic things that are being done to us a little bit rather than with us, and it's how do we bring that together and work with the sector then to find other ways of being able to make the money go further, because it goes back to, a lot of it goes back to funding as well, and you're right, 1 year settlements is just not good enough. So it's how do we create a system where we know what that horizon looks like beyond next year and the year after, so that you create systematic change in Wales and actually drive that forward. So balancing the books, you're talking about defence spending going up. It's a shame that it means that the poorest in society have to pay for it, rather than the wealthiest, and a wealth tax could potentially cover that cost, rather than it being taken off the most vulnerable in society. It just seems a bit disconnected for me and wrong in the way that that's being done, whereas you have people with lots of money, lots of big businesses that could have a wealth tax of some description coming onto it, that could fund some of that and fund that defence spending, whereas it doesn't then fall on local people.
I think it speaks to the earlier question about collaboration. So how are we going to face it? We'll face it together. That's the only way. And no matter what is said or what all the economics ends up being, the Newport sector is strongest when it works together, when its community works with its council and the council works with the groups and the organisations and businesses to create local growth and employment, supportive employment. And what I hear about the welfare debate, just taking it more widely, is, and it says right reforms, it's about empowerment. We need to empower people to go back in the workplace, not just talk about more and more money for more and more people who are struggling with life. I think the biggest surge in welfare spending is mental health over the recent years, and we're spending money on the symptom rather than dealing with the cause. Why are so many people struggling out there? We need to be empowering locally as well as nationally. What we're doing to help people who are struggling for various different reasons, and I think the local councils and the third sector particularly. I think the NHS. The reason why NHS is so skint is it's dealing with all the consequences at a crisis point, which is at its most costly. Where if the councils, with our third sector partners, and I think that's the only way, that's the only viable thing in my head, are the key to that preventative stuff. So we protect the NHS. You guys are the front line, and we're there with you, shoulder to shoulder. So, collaboration, it puts more emphasis on the importance of collaboration. Support the communities and the people who need to support, but also empower those and support those and help those who are struggling for whatever different reason to get back into the labour market so they feel they can do it. And I think that's the only way, empowerment through working together and collaborating.
I just want to come in on this. It was interesting. I had these questions the other day, and then as it happened, I went to a meeting in the afternoon and I got told a story which I think quite sits into this. It's about that collaboration, because I've been quite strong in trying to say about how important that preventative element is to the third sector. The work that you were doing to support people before they get into that crisis is absolutely incredible. I went to a meeting the other day, and someone had told me a story, and I got to be honest, it wasn't in Newport, but I can pretty much assure that these stories are probably everywhere, and you hear them all the time, and these happen. But there was a young lady who was in an abusive relationship. There was alcohol involved, there was drugs involved and drink involved, and a young child. And with the third sector organisation, that person was helped to remove herself from that relationship. With the third sector organisation, she was placed into volunteering because self-esteem, confidence was absolutely on the floor. She went to a volunteering opportunity. And she'd been volunteering, they'd been working really hard on her, working really hard with her to try and kind of push her on. And her dream was to go to college in order to get a better life for her child. The setting shut down for a couple of weeks. And the lady said to her, she left, she said, "I don't want to see you again." She said, "Because you need to be going off to college whenever else in a nice way." And then she said she opened up the setting at the end of September, and she walked back in and she said, "I'm upset this year." She said, "I'm gutted that you've turned back up. Why?" And she said, "I have a Tuesday off." She said, "I started college 3 weeks ago." And she said, "But I still want to carry on volunteering." Now, the reason we picked that bit up is because that lady's life has changed because of the third sector organisations there. That prevention, that being able to give her that empowerment that could change her life. And I think what we need to do is we need to really pick up on some of those stories and pick up as a third sector. We need your help on this as well. Is to say to the health board, say to all, the local authorities and everyone, to say, actually, if you help these people, the cost avoidance further down the line is going to be absolutely incredible. And that is whereby we need to think a little bit differently about that funding that we get. It's got to stop funding the crisis. It's actually got to fund the prevention and fund that real support of those people to have better lives at the outset. And I think that's quite key. And I think that's part of the message that we need to take on. We've talked about prevention, we've talked about the funding and that, but that's really the key to some of this, because we can't keep on funding the crisis any longer. But we need the third sector help. We need the third sector's voice to be able to take that forward. So I just want to pick up on that. I think it's quite a...
When I worked for Christian Aid, one of the strap lines there was to give somebody a hand up rather than a hand out. And that's where, going back to especially with mental health, if you're worried constantly of how I'm going to feed myself, my family, it just builds and builds and builds, and it's making those little changes to support, to allow people then to have the headspace to then do to get themselves back in the workplace, to get themselves into a voluntary organisation, to be able to build. But whilst you're constantly focused on, I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet, it's a vicious cycle, and it's that hand up and saying, okay, we'll support you. It'll be there as a safety net for now, just to get people back. And I think that's where the welfare system works at its best. And then the collaboration then between councils, between government, and yourselves in the sector just helps.
Yeah, and I think we've seen the health share of the Welsh Government's budget go up and up over the just as it has at a UK level and just about everywhere else over the years. And it's now over half of the Welsh Government's budget is the money for healthcare. And somehow we've got to get that money, and I guess here locally through Iron Bevan University Health Board, we've got to get more of that money into the preventative agenda, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because so much of it is firefighting, and you can understand it. The hospitals, the GP surgeries, primary care, they've got a lot that comes at them that they have to deal with, and that takes a lot of resource. But somehow we're always going to be on that treadmill, aren't we? Unless we get more of that money somehow diverted into prevention and working with the third sector and others on that preventative agenda.
And there's a huge piece of work around that, because the thing is that one of the things we've been saying for a while now is that kind of, and I don't know, this is about making people's lives better, but we understand that where you have public money, there's got to be that, you've got to justify that public money. So there's got to be that element of it there. I suppose there needs to be a big piece of work really to understand, generationally how much money that would cost, public services if those people get sucked into those expensive hospital needs and local authority needs and things like that. If we can just try and do, and it's not a piece of work that we really want to do, but it's a piece I think that we need to do as a third sector. I think it's going to be key as we move forward. And this isn't something that we done overnight. This is going to take 5-10 years or whatever it is to really see the benefits of some of that preventative work and that readjustment of funding, I think, to really get it where it needs to go.
And part of that is collecting very good quality data. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Is we're not very good at collecting good quality data across different sectors, and then because we haven't got very good data potentially or sporadic, it's hard to plan and map out what needs to and how much and where those efficiencies could come. How do you shift something if you don't measure it? How do you know? And it's that element of systems not necessarily supporting the outcomes that we want to happen, and that's something that collaboratively we need to get better at doing. We've got fantastic universities that do lots of this work. How do we bring them into it and say, well, okay, the other people with the big brains to go and look at these trends and things, but if you don't give them the tools and the information, we can't get to that point. So I think as a smaller country, we should be able to do this, and
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Don't give yourself on data. I'm a bit of a geek, but as a recovering academic, the academic space, they lack the ground knowledge of what's happening on the coalface that many of you will see. And I know many of your organisations, because they're firefighting, how many of you can record the data, right? Who have the time, the inclination, to do that and measure it, to send it to one of us, because you're helping people, right? So there's a big thing about how do we support the third sector with the time and the skills to understand and support, the data, because you might be doing great work. Some of you will be doing absolutely amazing work, but none of us will know. And so how do we support you record that and then feed it into the system? Because then once the system starts seeing that impact, then the money does start to flow. And I think there's a huge disconnect.
Because it's been able to prove it as well, and especially when you're accountability and when you come to committees like my committee saying, well, we want to spend this money, well, how, why, what data have we got behind it? And it's that, we're also, we're geeks when it comes to data, but it's making it easy for you to do it rather than it being a burden to do it, and taking you on that journey to say, well, this is the benefit to you for doing it. So you prove to you that actually it's worth your while in doing it as well. So there's a lot of communication and building those trusted relationships to be able to do that as well. I think
it is really important, isn't it? Because Welsh Government will always say they need an evidence base. So if they're thinking of funding an organisation or a piece of work, they need the evidence base to show that the expected benefit from providing that funding will come about. So data is really, really important, and the committees in the Senedd come across problems of lack of data all the time and lack of specific Welsh data, and it does make it very difficult to evaluate, the success of a programme or an organisation, or whether something that's put forward as a proposal would actually deliver what it's expected to deliver. Digitisation, we were talking about quite a lot now, and there are technological developments that could be really beneficial and important, but getting them in place, providing the funding and the systems, and doing it in a timely fashion is difficult. And a lot of the big IT projects have got a bad history, really, haven't they? Of the money expected to fund the system has proved wholly inadequate, and the budget overruns as sort of legendary, and also the time is taken to get systems in place. So we do need to be a lot better on the technological side, as well as expecting organisations to evidence what they do much more. But one thing I think we ought to reference as well is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, because that's legislation in place in Wales that tries to make sure that key organisations, public sector and others, take that long-term, more preventative, more joined-up approach. And I know it's one thing to have legislation in place, it's another thing to make it actually count for something on the ground. But we are seeing, I think, some significant changes. We have seen and are seeing towards that more long-term preventative agenda with that legislation in place to help drive it. And internationally, it's recognised as being a significant piece of legislation, which I think is good.
Great, John. I'm just conscious of the time. Have you got time for one more question, or?
I've got to be in a bay at 12, so perhaps one more. Is it?
Okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Or which one to choose? Okay. With significant increase in new homes being built in Newport, the city has experienced a rise in residents, many of whom work elsewhere. This has led to a potential disconnect, between the local community and services offered by the third sector organisations. Given the plans for more homes in the coming years, what strategies can be implemented to encourage and support new residents in engaging with their local third sector groups? Sorry, John, I know I keep throwing to you, but I know you need to get going.
Yeah, okay. Well, a couple of thoughts, really. I can remember having this sort of discussion with Mark Drakeford, when he was First Minister, and we were talking about lots of people coming to Newport from Bristol, but perhaps still going back to Bristol for shopping, for leisure, for entertainment. And his view was a lot of research shows that might be the case initially, but after a little period of time, people get more embedded, in the place where they're now living.
I'm one of those. I'm from Bristol, so yeah.
You can vote for that.
Yeah.
You can vote for that.
Yeah.
So it may be that some of the sort of worries about people coming here and not engaging locally and not being involved locally, and not actually factors that we need to worry about too much beyond the short term. I mean, I don't know, I haven't looked at research myself, but that certainly was Mark's view. I think one good example we've got of that actually is that I can think of is the Glanflean Youth Football Club, because on that Glanflean development, they've got a wonderful youth football setup now, and it's grown quite quickly and organically. And they've now got a disability youth football team, which I think the nearest one, outside of Newport, to Newport is Barry, I think. So, I went to their first disability football session at the indoor football centre by the SDR bridge just the other week, and it was amazing to see. But they've grown quickly and organically, and that's largely people who've come to Newport from other places and are now knitted into the local community, taking a real interest. and helping others, across Newport. So, I think that's very, very positive. And when it grows organically from the bottom up, it's more powerful in many ways, isn't it, than being encouraged by existing organisations. So, yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to look at the research, but hopefully some of those worries are at least to some extent misplaced.
I think looking at parts of that sort of question, I think the concern was with some of the big sort of housing developments, it's obviously lots of houses in a small area, and there isn't almost like to try and build a sort of village, but it's missing that sort of that community hub. And if people are literally just living in their homes and then travelling for sort of work, it's like, how does that community come together and sort of breaking apart a bigger sort of Newport into smaller sort of pockets? And if it's a brand new pocket of how do the existing third sector engage with new people to the area or forming a new third sector organisation for that small community.
Before I disappear down to the data, I'm sure Dimitri will provide a good answer on this, but there's a lot of
no pressure.
There's a lot of interest now in placemaking, isn't there? So you don't just think of new housing development, in terms of the housing, but you think of it in terms of placemaking, how it's integrated and connected to what's already there in all sorts of ways: public services, third sector, community activity, transport, active travel, cycling and walking, nice green space. All of that now is part of placemaking. So it's much more wide. It's much wider, isn't it, than just thinking we're going to plant some houses there, and that'll be good for economic development, in the local area. So, I'm sure Dimitri will talk about the local development plan and, what that's based on and everything that it brings to the table. But there are certainly questions. I mean, that's sort of going forward, isn't there? But lots of houses are already in place, and perhaps we haven't always had that enlightened approach to the extent that it should have been part of development. So there are questions about public services, aren't there GP surgeries, strain on local roads, public transport, and as you say, community facilities that do bring people together socially. So, lots and lots of questions to be answered, and there are issues about the responsibility of the developers as well, aren't there? The Section 106 agreements where developers agree to fund, maybe a new school, maybe a GP surgery, maybe a community centre, as part of having planning permission to build the development, because, they make a lot of money out of these developments. So, yeah, there's a lot involved, isn't there? But, the local authority and the local development plan is absolutely crucial, I think. So there you are, having shifted on hospital. Thanks, John. I'll now disappear, but thanks very much anyway for inviting me, and thanks very much to everyone for coming along. As we've all been saying, really, it's all about working together, and an event like this today enables that, doesn't it? So well done to everybody involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's following on from what John was saying there. Planning and planning law and the LDP is key to making some of this happen. It's also about building communities rather than just homes, and I know that the council have been trying to do that in linking up the transport with different aspects. But one of the other things that I think about is, well, when new building happens and new communities are created, it's the stuff that they're supposed to do that they do last rather than first. So if you're building, so they get the profit and then it slips and then it's eventually happens. By that point, those communities have sort of set up and they then have found somewhere else to go. Whereas if we would change the planning policy so that if you're creating a school or creating a community centre or somewhere where you're going to have facilities, that they're created alongside that first phase of development, so that at least people start using it and it's built up from the ground up. So it's more of resequencing how things happen and making it these big, as John said, these big developers do make quite a lot of money out of this. So it's put your money where your mouth is, a little bit of that, to create some of that and to create our communities and to link them to other communities. So it with the planning departments and the LDP, it's how do you embed that into a process that might need legislative change, or it might be within what you're able to do currently, and then with some of the communities where you've got lots of houses but not a lot of anything else already built, is how do we reappropriate some of those bigger buildings, like some of those chapels that we've got, some of those bigger older buildings that are just possibly empty. How do we create, in England and in Scotland, there's a law that says that the communities have a right to buy on these things. How do we bring, we haven't got that law in Wales. How do we bring that in so that we actually own community assets in our communities that are then being able to use for third sector, for hosting different things, so that you create a hub within those communities and build that, rather than it being on the open market. Well, we could buy it, we couldn't. Making it a right for those communities to be able to come together and buy those. So it's some of the more structural stuff, again, that needs to underpin the good work that goes on, and to help councils to be able to be smarter in the way that you're able to plan new estates, new building projects, and work collaboratively then with those big developers to make sure that they do the right thing as well within that community.
Hospital Pass, is it? Yeah, Newport's the fastest growing city in Wales by a mile, double of Cardiff. We're experiencing those growing pains, to be fair to say. And those communities that come in, there is an element of work hard, come home, feed yourself, watch Netflix, pass out, wake up, go to work, or go to your office in the house, start looking at the emails, and you don't have any time to engage with the wider community. I think that's a societal issue first. That's what I'll say. That Newport, I don't think, is unique in that. The scale of incumbents, though, I would say makes a slight difference in Wales. And I think there's it says what strategies, if I've read the question correctly. Again, that's about the council with you guys saying what's on your doorstep that you are completely unaware of. That is, and I think schools, and opening up the schools more in the community space as being those community hubs, whether you do or don't have children, I think is really important, because there's always usually a big school or schools in those big communities. Like Glenlane's got one already, and there's a second one planned. And I think then they start to naturally form and grow. But you've got to I think a big thing is about social media campaign, or campaigns generally per se, by the local authorities and those third sectors themselves, to reach out, to hold that hand and say, did you know there's a free Zumba class down the hall, sports hall just down the road? Did you know there's a family toddler group? Did you know? And at least when they have the information, those make those informed choices. Because I think a lot of people hate that lifestyle. I think they do, and I think they do feel crummy about themselves, because it just feels like a treadmill, doesn't it? Life just feels like that treadmill. And then if they've got that leaflet that says, or they see that post that says there's a Zumba class down the road, oh my god!
And it's creating that infrastructure underneath it, that underpins it all, doesn't it? So that you can, rather than having to jump in your car to go to it, that you could catch a bus at the end of your road that takes you there, or that you can walk there.
Yeah, and that's why I think schools are important.
Yeah, exactly. So
because a lot of schools will be placed in walkable distances.
So you create that environment where communities can grow, and if you're walking to school or you're talking to other people, and then it creates those relationships within it. And that's what drives communities, is relationships. So it's how do you encourage that without forcing it, I suppose.
I think there's some quick wins we could do with this one, to be honest. I think that, I bought a new house going back a number of years ago, but I don't think I had a kind of welcome pack to the area if you were new coming in. If we know that there's demographics coming in from Bristol and moving to Newport, why haven't we got maybe a welcome to Newport? And it says a little about third sector organisations, gives directions to the local authority. It'd be a simple conversation that would be with maybe the developers to say, make sure everyone has this. It was something I thought maybe that's third sector organisations getting involved in producing something like that as well. Schools very much key of that, and having those community hubs, I think, are really quite key. And with third sector organisations wanting to get involved in those new developments, maybe there's a piece of work for GAVO in particular to actually go into those communities once they are set up and saying, this is what is available, this is what we can do. Maybe we can help you set up community association, football clubs, etc., depending on the size of them. So maybe there's some work that we can do there as well to support that. I don't know whether it's possible. The way that the County Voluntary Council system works, that we cover a number of areas and support third sector organisations across that patch. If we are finding that there are certain developments which are having an influx of people from certain companies, maybe from Bristol, maybe we can reach out to those companies and ask, do they give some time for some volunteering in the new area if that's the way that they're doing it? I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, it might be complicated, but it's not impossible. We could have those conversations with those organisations and the county voluntary councils over there. So, there's little quick wins we can do. We can use the digital systems as well. There's maybe apps that people can have that access around, as part of those welcome packs for people moving into the area, just giving that up-to-date information on what's going on. So it kind of just brings them a little bit more into what's going on in Newport, I think. They're quick wins that we could probably take on and consider.
Right.
Yeah,
I
know. Sorry.
Thank you, panel, for that, and thank you to everyone who posted those sort of questions. Like I say, we've got a few questions that we'll pick up onto the website. Thank you very much. Can a round of applause for our panel, please?